something on top of the cliff starts vocalizing at us. The only way I can describe the sound is if you took a howler monkey and you combined that with a very angry bull. It was kind of a moo 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 sound. My name is Randy Hutchings. I'm a field investigator from McMinnville, Tennessee. Most of the research areas that I cover are around the Cumberland Plateau, the Cumberland Mountains of Tennessee. And what got me interested in Bigfoot was in 1997, on May 23rd, myself and my cousin trekked up to a abandoned rock quarry just outside of the town that we live in. And it takes about an hour or so to trek up to that rock quarry. And once we'd trekked up there, there's a lake up there in one of the like a box canyon, surrounded on all sides by cliffs. And we had just got up there and dipped our feet into the water. And we might have been there 5 minutes, and something on top of the cliff starts vocalizing at us. And the only way I can describe the sound that it made is if you took a howler monkey and you combine that with a very angry bull. It was kind of a moo 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 sound. And obviously we were both perplexed as to what was doing this. Initially, we just kind of took for granted that it was like maybe a hunter or somebody up there hiking messing with us. I grew up in the woods, here in Tennessee, and I'd never heard anything remotely like that before. So I immediately assumed that it's someone messing with us. So me and my cousin kind of laugh about it, and we make the sound back up towards the cliffs, that in response, and everything goes quiet. And we figure, well, they had their time and their laugh. And then we watch as about a 300-ish pound boulder comes flying, and I mean flying off that cliff, a good 20, 25, maybe 30 feet off that cliff. A boulder big enough. I'm 6'4". I'm a big guy, and I couldn't hope to pick up that rock. And especially I can't even imagine. You'd have to have a catapult to throw it the way that it got thrown. And so it goes splashing down into the lake. And my cousin and myself look at one another, and we're both kind of, and my cousin literally says, you would have to have thumbs to do that, right? Because how else did it get thrown like that? So we as we're kind of perplexed and freaked out, this vocalization starts up again, up on the cliff. And I can't tell you what that vocalization meant, but it very much to us felt as if it was a, get out of here. You're not welcome here, kind of aspect to it. So that's what we did. We'd only been up there maybe, 10 by this point, by the time all this had concluded, 10, 15 minutes after we arrived. But we left, and that caused me to try to figure out what it was that we came in contact with, because I couldn't understand. No matter what I did, I couldn't understand what could throw that rock like that. So I started asking around with hunter friends of mine. Had one of them say it was a cow howling up on the. I don't know how they thought that a cow is throwing boulders, but but eventually I heard a recording that was somewhat similar, not really, but somewhat similar to what I heard online. And that got me in touch with the BFRO. And so I got in touch with the BFRO. They interviewed me, gave me some pointers on what I should do. I actually became a field investigator with them for a very short amount of time. Then through that, I got in touch with Mary Green, the Tennessee Bigfoot lady from back in the 90s and early 2000s. And she invited me to join her group, which at the time was the Gulf Coast Bigfoot Research Organization. And so I I joined with them and became a field investigator with them. And, but I still had kind of like ties to the BFRO. I was still getting here and there, uh, field investigative work to go out to people's, properties on site and talk to them about what they'd witnessed, what they'd encountered. But I was also doing this with the GCBRO. And then I started doing it with several smaller little groups, of, researchers, mainly because I just happen to live at the base of the Cumberland Mountains, and there's a lot of activity in the Cumberland Mountains.
Well, it sounds like that was kind of an interesting initiation into the whole field. So how long ago was that, and what's transpired since then? Have you had any personal encounters?
That was all back in 1997, like I said, started. So I've been doing this since 1997, about June of July, August, something like that of 1997. Uh, yeah, it's spiraled hugely since then, especially with all the field investigative work I've got through all those different groups.
Let's start with, kind of when you first started investigating, what were some of the more interesting cases, and what happened?
One of the very first, I got to go out on sites I got to go out on that I felt was really interesting was, an older couple. They had a granddaughter with Down syndrome, and so they had custody of her and lived out in the middle of the woods. They contacted me about coming up there, about some weird things that were happening. They were hearing knocks, they were hearing vocalizations. So I went up there on a Sunday, waited for them to get home from church, uh, met them in their early 60s. Like I said, their granddaughter, I think, was about 12 at the time, lived in a big log cabin right on a big ridge. And the first thing the gentleman, says to me is like, "Sir, let me show you what I found this morning." And he walks me down to the fence line. And again, this is on a big hill, but, there's basically a fence, metal fence there, and where weeds and grass had kind of woven themselves through all this metal grating, um, made a perfect little blind. And right behind it was a 10-foot by 10-foot, what looked for all intents and purposes like a gorilla bed. Um, and about 8 feet away was another one about 8 foot by 8 foot. And what was really interesting, you could tell that the grass on the edges looked woven in certain spots. Not just like flattened down, but woven. And what was really interesting to me was there was a poke plant, that had been pulled over into this nest, and all of the berries on this poke plant, the part that had been bent over at least into the nest, were missing. And I spoke to a friend of mine who happens to be a game warden, about that. I'm like, what exactly eats poke plant berries? Because I thought those were poisonous, and they're poisonous to humans, but apparently deer will eat them. But other nocturnal animals will eat them because of there happens to be something in there that helps their night vision. This is what this game warden told me. So I found that really interesting. Where the nests were, you could have just, I'm a big, like I said, I'm a big guy. I could sit in this thing and just look at their back patio, at my leisure, and they couldn't see me. Um, Another instance that, early instance that I encountered was, there's a family that, in this, not very far from that same area. All of this is on the Cumberland Plateau, but they were having instances where, when their sons would ride their tractors in the back field, uh, this they said that this large man-like thing would come to the edge of the wood line and stare them down. Uh, so I got to go out there, and that was where I actually got to see my first footprint. Was on their property, right in the creek bottom, 14 and a half inches long, uh, big splayed toes on it, little bits by little pieces here and there. I did not have my own personal sighting until 2011, though. Would you like me to go into that?
Sure. Yeah. Give us details.
Okay. In 2001, I started a live event company, that basically traveled around and used group campsites here in Tennessee and a couple in North Georgia And what we would do is kind of put on a Renaissance festival sort of an event where people from all over the country would show up, and they would buy cabins, rent cabins, I should say, at these group campsites. And some people would vendors, so they would have their shirt, their clothing, period clothing, medieval type clothing again. And other people would show up and just dress up in full regalia, looking like nobles and such, and just have a good time. Um, so that was started in 2001, and I've been using state parks for this for 10 years when I had this sighting. And if you'd have told me at that time that there was anything in the state park where I had my sighting, I would have completely disagreed with you. I had literally spent 4,000 hours in that park in that 10 years running events. Some of the events were a weekend long. Some of the events were a week long. We had a couple of 12-day long events. And it was on our first 12-day long event in August of 2011. On the fifth day, we had a 3-hour kind of little event within the event where there was mock battles with fake weapons. And that had gone for about 3 hours. And we were going to shut things down for the night. And one of my staff members said, "Well, I'm going to go down to the river that's about a quarter mile from site and have me a smoke, and I'm going to go to bed." And I'm like, "Well, I'll go with you." And so we start to head down this trail, and most of that trail actually is paved up until a good point. You can take a car a good ways down that trail. But we start down this trail, and as we start down this trail, off to our right is the last cabin in that section. It's called C section. And as we get to that last cabin, we hear a snap crack off to our right. And immediately, it was so obvious, we turn expecting me and my staff member, expecting another staff member to be, running to catch up with us, to come down there with us or something. And instead, there is what I can only describe as about a 7.5 foot tall hairy man thing that is walking parallel to us. And if you traced, well, I'm not, we'll get into that right now. Walking parallel to us, and we both just kind of stop and freeze. This thing takes about 4 or 5 more steps into some really tall grass right at the edge of the wood line, and turns its entire top half, just turns towards us and stares at us for what seemed like forever, but it was probably just like 2 or 3, 4 seconds. But in those 3 or 4 seconds, the guy I was with was also a big guy. And we both agreed later that there was this sense of something with its body language of like we were not threats to this thing. There was absolutely no concern whatsoever this thing had in its body language, just the way it moved, the confidence of it. We were not a threat, and it just turned the top half of its body, turned around, and walked into the woods. And we both started screaming like girls. I'm not going to lie. It freaked us out. And, this is after years of me already doing this, going out, field investigating, hoping to see something like this. It happens at an event in the woods when I'm not expecting it. So through that sighting, basically we end up finding a hot spot right outside on the edge of the park there, and on a private property. We end up getting in good with the people that own the private property because they know about the activity that's going on there. And that led into other encounters that I've had. Another encounter that I've had up there that we had was we contacted my filmmaker buddy, Joshua Manning from Boston. He came down with a lot of cameras, and we got a 2.5 minute video of what appears to be a chocolate brown haired something with forward facing eyes, peekabooing at us from between logs like this. And this is all of this is happening in about a 250 acre area. there at the edge of the park. Um, I had a sighting, but the other sighting I had, and that's the sighting that changed me and changed the way I research, changed the way that I take this phenomenon, the way I approach it. Was on June the 8th of 2016. And this is after we had found this hot spot where they knock at us and they vocalize at us. We gifted there a few times with fruit, and the fruit would disappear. We actually had one instance where we were leaving fruit, we're leaving mangoes, and 2 weeks go by of us cycling out, apples and peaches. The 2 weeks go by, and we come back to the same area where we're gifting this stuff, and there's one lone mango left where we've been leaving fruit, which my research buddy was kind of like, I think they're asking for more mangoes. But in this area, like I said, on June 8th of 2016, I had trekked about 3.5 miles back into this area and was following a creek back up towards where near the campsite in the state park, actually. And as I was trekking through some mountain laurel, very thick mountain laurel, I was having to push my hands in front of me and take a step, push my hand in front of me again and take another step. And it was so thick. As I'm doing this, something approaches me in this mountain laurel, and I managed to catch about 3 or 4 steps, what sounds like something stepping through this thick stuff. It's the same way I'm stepping through it, approaching me. I never saw what it was, but it was just enough to kind of put a little heat in my step to get out of it. And as I'm again pushing my way through this mountain laurel, I push a chunk of it back, and off to the left at about a 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock angle, there is a big upturned tree and a root ball that's facing me. I don't know how to describe, still don't know how to describe this better than the bottom quarter of this root ball to this tree looked like it had a hole in it. And this hole, I initially just, it's June. I initially just imagined that this is probably a coyote den, because coyotes love to make dens and little things like that up under the root balls like that. And I'm expecting that because it's June, they've got pups. So I'm about to get torn up. And the reason I say this is a hole, I'm completely convinced this is a hole upon looking at it, is just the depth of how dark it is. It is black in the way that like only like something that has depth of like a hole would, right? So as I'm staring at this hole, thinking I'm about to get tore up by coyotes, maybe, it moves and shifts. And I don't know why to this day. I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Ron Moorhead actually told me this weekend that he thought it was just cognitive dissonance. Just my brain did not want to accept what I was looking at as soon as I saw it. So it just that's a hole, but I don't know. But when it moved and shifted, it shifted in such a way that it kind of pushed itself up like this, up against that root ball, and was like trying to looked almost like a child. The way when if you've ever put a kid on a couch, like in timeout, and they're kind of like pushed themselves up against the couch, like, oh, they're upset, or they're wanting to not be in that situation. That is, for all intents and purposes, what this thing was doing. And it didn't look like a monkey, Miss Eastburn. It looked like a child. It looked like a black hairy child. And once that all started hitting me, I tore through that mountain laurel, managed to find the trailhead, got to back to my car, drove the hour back to my home from this area, And during that drive back, I convinced myself I'm not going to tell anybody about this. I'm by myself. No one's going to believe me. Not even going to tell my wife. I'm just gonna straight face this. But within seconds of me getting home, I open the door and I come inside, and my wife immediately is like, "What's wrong, honey?" And I'm like, what do you mean, what's wrong?" And she's like, I can tell something's wrong. You just your body language, you're tense, your face, you're white. Um, so I took her aside into the bedroom and I told her, and I'm not gonna lie, I broke down. I'm not a crying type, but I broke down and started crying because there was this. I'm a father of four, and this thing was about the size of my youngest daughter at the time. It looked like it was about 5'1", 5'2". It wasn't huge, right? And it looked like a child. It looked like a dark skinned, jet black haired child. His hair was, I mean, the hair was all over his body, but like you could see its skin when it shifted and all that. Again, I don't know why I couldn't tell what it was when I first stared at it, but when it moved, it was very obvious. Maybe it was because I had kids and put them up on the couch in the timeout, and they did that. I don't know. Maybe that's why it resonated with me when they took that position. But um, it completely changed the way I my outlook on all of this. Uh, for a well, for a couple of weeks, I didn't go back up there. It rattled me that, and my wife, bless her heart, tells me, she's like, honey, what did you think was going to happen? When she was trying to console me when I got upset, she's like, you're going up there and doing that. What did you think was going to happen? And I tell her, I'm like, well, I thought at best maybe I'd see something peek out from behind a tree at me. Um, I didn't expect to see a child and a child trying to hide at that, if that's what it was that it was doing.
In what way did this change your research? I know this changed your outlook. Did you see them as more human-like after that?
Yes, yes. I can't. I that It did not look like a monkey. It did not look like an ape. It looked like a scared child. And the one that I saw, when I saw the one in 2011, I didn't get to see it because, I mean, it was dark. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, but there was enough moonlight that, we got enough definition out of it. I didn't get to make out a very good facial definition of it when we saw it. But it looked like it wasn't built like the patty, the thick. It was built more like if you put muscles on an NBA player. It was leaner. But even when I saw that one, it moved much more. It was on, its back legs. It moved human-like. It didn't move like an ape. And seeing this this childlike thing, I don't know, seeing it the way that I did, uh, yeah, I guess I falling into there's some sort of a people camp, I guess. Uh, and because of that, I have become much more respectful when I go out now. Um, because it's like, to me, it's like, well, there's families of these things out there. This isn't just a pod of apes, as I kind of was assuming they were when I was doing this originally. Uh, it very much feels like I'm going out and interacting with family units of a people. Uh, we've heard them vocalize. We've heard the samurai chatter, like you kind of hear on the Sierra sounds in these areas. And at one point, we were out there for a couple of hours in this one area where we've heard vocalizations before, and we heard Miss Eastburn what sounded like a child. Oh, there's the phone. What sounded like a child just start babbling, almost like a toddler would be babbling.
Let's go into how this new kind of mindset about what they are possibly, or like it sounds like you gained a lot more respect and empathy maybe for the situation, so you weren't just hunting them down anymore, but maybe trying to understand them. So how did that change your research?
It made a lot of the up in there's a specific road up there in the Cumberland Mountains, the Cumberland Plateau that we research in, that we've already talked to 12 families that have basically are sharing the same individual that's coming around their house. And the reason we say that is he's kind of a window peeker, and they've named him Atticus, and they described him as having this is their words, gentlemanly swath of gray hair on the front of his face, on the front of his head. Multiple people have seen him, not knowing that their neighbors are having the same experiences, but stuff like that has now brought me to the conclusion of these things are much more intelligent than I was giving them credit for. Um, it gives an opening into why they may be doing like Atticus is doing, why that particular one is going in and tree peeking, or I mean window peeking. It's just giving us kind of a whole new outlook on why they do the things that they do. It's not just, I don't see it as animal behavior anymore so much as why are these people doing this?
Well, tell me some of the things that they do and what you think their motivation is behind it.
I think in some regards, like with that Atticus instance, he's been seen basically window peeking while they're watching television. Families are watching television, and there's one of the properties that has an amphitheater that carries that has several big concerts during the year there, and I think that it's entertainment value, partially, is one reason that one specifically is doing what it's doing. As for other reasons, I can't think of any right off the top of my head. Sorry, my brain's going blank.
So in your conclusion now, you went from like strictly just an animal to kind of humanistic characteristics that they have now. What do you actually think they are?
Personally, I think they're probably some species of archaic human, related to us to some degree. I don't know if I want to say they're remnant hybrids of like Neanderthal Denisovans, but I think there's some kind of archaic hominid, that either we already know about, like in the fossil record, but we just haven't connected it with that's what they are, or just maybe that's something we haven't discovered yet as far as what, in the fossil record. We keep discovering new hominids, every couple of years. So, but yeah, I think they're probably an archaic hominid.
What would you advise people going out and researching these things? I mean, there are so many different motivations that people have. Some just want to see them, some want to record them, some want to shoot them, some want them for, scientific purposes. What would be your advice to people going out and researching these?
I don't agree with going out and shooting one for a specimen. I think that we've got, we have environmental genetics testing now that we could prove these things without having to shoot one. Just my opinion. As far as advice to people, you don't have to go miles out to experience this stuff. That's a big thing I think that a lot of people don't understand is there is wilderness right outside some of these little towns, especially here in Tennessee, where there's activity going on. And if you want to go out and experience this stuff, you don't have to go out as far as you might think. One of the things I would suggest is find watersheds. Watersheds seem to have a lot of activity around them. Seep springs, that's one thing we found in multiple of our sites, active areas. We found that if you can find a seep spring, which is a spring that basically is, the water seeping up out of the ground, it's there year round. Those are very, very important to them, because of deer in the area, them needing water during the year. That water's going to be there. They seem to stay in areas around those seep springs, at least from our research. Um, but if you're going out there, be respectful. Um, I think I think in intuition, like what it is you're wanting to do when you go out there. Um, it might sound weird, but I really feel like these things can kind of read that off of you. What your intentions are when you're going out there. So if you go out there with positive intentions, that I'm not out here to bother you, I'm not out here to hurt you, I think you get a lot more positive feedback and encounters that way.
So how often do you get out now and look for them or research?
I try to get out about twice a week if possible.
How often do you actually have any kind of, vocals, or obviously not sightings, but vocals, or see evidence?
I would say that's the thing. Anything that would be conclusive evidence, or something so obvious as a vocalization or wood knocks, I would say once every 10 trips, something like that. It's not every trip. It's definitely not every trip. It's most trips are, a lot of the trips are just ended up enjoying the wilderness for what it is. But
What's the most common piece of evidence that you get when you're 1 out of 10 times?
wood knocks in our area. There's specific areas where it seems like they set up sentries, and where we go into those areas so much, um, and I suspect the ones in the next to the park kind of accept us because we were throwing those events for years and years and years right next to where they lived. Um, they seem to have sentries in certain spots a lot of the times, and so on certain trips we'll be out there, and we've taken like 42 people out, and only 2 people have never actually heard anything on those trips. Uh, but 40 people we've taken out have heard things where those sentries will go off. We have had them vocalize at us, do whoops and stuff like that. We've whooped a couple of times and they've whooped back at us. But by and large, it's wood knocks and whoops that we get back that commonly.
You said earlier that, that there was, at times you've heard, more distinct language-like sounds, like kind of like the Sierra sounds or whatever. How would you compare them to the Sierra sounds that you've heard?
Well, one instance we heard was a male, female, and what sounded like a small one, and it sounded just kind of like that. The way the Sierra sound sounds like garbled, just on the verge of you should be able to understand what they're saying, but it's just garbled. That's what it sounded like. It was kind of like a very deep, and then followed by kind of more of a feminine, but still deep. Blah, 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 blah. But the really wild one that we heard what sounded like a toddler or an infant just start babbling out in the woods, and then a feminish voice. It was still deep, but a feminine voice say the word, what sounded like the word seesaw, almost like seesaw, but it was a seesaw. And the woods just went quiet. And I don't know what seesaw means, but I think it's, shut your mouth. But it really seemed like a little baby just started talking, and a mother almost was like, "Shh, shut up."
Well, that's interesting that you correlated that, what happened in connection with the sounds that you were hearing from them. That's interesting. Have you seen anything unusual like orbs or any of that sort of thing? Because some people do describe that when they are in an area where Bigfoot exists.
I have not seen orbs in that area, but I have witnessed orbs in another active area in a different part of the Cumberland Mountains, Cumberland Plateau.
Was it associated with any Bigfoot activity, or was it just isolated to the orbs?
We have had Bigfoot activity happen at that cabin several times. Yes, we didn't have activity. The orbs didn't happen alongside Bigfoot activity that trip, but we did have orbs coming down the hillside towards the cabin one trip. Yeah, in the same area where we have Bigfoot activity. Yes.
Did they do anything unusual, or did you just see them and that was that?
When we saw them, they were about 100 yards away up a hill, and they were coming down this hill, and they started getting close to the cabin. And what was kind of wild about it was a friend of mine got freaked out by it, pulled out his pistol, and started shooting up into the air, and they just disappeared. And we kind of laughed it off as swamp gas at the time. But over the years, when we've retold that story to people, they've often been like, "Well, why would swamp gas just disappear when you started shooting up into the air?" Because that's what happened. As soon as he started shooting up in the air, the orbs just went out.
And that was an isolated experience, the only time you've seen the orbs?
That's the only time I've seen orbs. Yes.
Do you find anything as far as structures or, huts or buildings or anything like that that they seem to be around?
Yes, we found several of those just outside the park on that private property that I was telling you about. We found what looks like where trees have been felled over, and then all of the limbs have been broken out of it. So it's almost like turning this pushed over tree into a big long tent. We found those. We found where there have been smaller trees that have been almost woven together. We found one structure that was so large, and it was right at the end of a game trail, where these trees had been woven all together, and all the plants had been woven in amongst these trees. That we termed it the kill box, because we literally found deer prints where they were right up to this thing, where it looked as if they were being maybe ran down this game trail and being pushed into this thing where they couldn't jump over and get out. Maybe where they almost like they were using it to hunt. We found, like I said, those nests. We found tons and tons of so many arches in our main research area that are held down by other trees, held down by big rocks, that we have actually gone to calling one of our local Bigfoots Archie, because of just how big some of the trees are that he's been pulling over. But yeah, we find that regularly. Mm-hmm.
The families that know this Archie character, or is in there, do they have any kind of a relationship with others in that area?
Oh, are you talking about Atticus, the
Yes.
one that
Yeah.
the window peaks?
Yes.
There is a yoga instructor lady that works at one of the businesses that Archie comes into. When I say comes into, I mean comes into the property of. Who says that she has a friendship with him per se, but it consists when I've asked her about it, she basically describes that she has those Tibetan singing bowls, and she'll get back on the back patio of this business with these Tibetan singing bowls, and she says that at night, it's usually about 11 o'clock to midnight, Archie comes up and makes himself known, and she says several times Archie's stepped out into a place where the moonlight's on him, or some light is cast on him, and he just sits there and enjoys it.
Again, sounds like Archie just really likes the entertainment.
Yeah, it really does.
What else can you tell us about Bigfoot, your research, your opinions or views about it?
I can tell you that there are, in my opinion, there's more of these things around than I think people give credit to. Like I said, my main area is the Cumberland Plateau, but the Cumberland Plateau in my region is about 35 miles wide from one side to the next, and within that area, since 2015, we've discovered 5 areas just within that, the part of the plateau there. Some of them is about 20 miles apart from one another, but it seems to be different families of these things residing in these areas. So I think there's more of these things around than people really realize. And again, you don't have to have gigantic swaths of Pacific Northwest wilderness to house these things. There's one of the families we found seems to be living in a 150-acre wood. It's an area that's never been logged. It's got sinkholes in it. You can't really get even back there with a truck to log the stuff, and I think that's why they're secure there.
When you were able to find these 5 pivotal points within a fairly small radius there of that 35 mile radius, what were the telltale signs in each case that you could identify that this was perhaps a unique family or group, a clan or whatever, in each of these 5 locations?
One of the things was we found different sets of footprints, different size footprints in each of the locations. But one of the things that we really makes us think it's different family units is we've actually driven a couple of times from one point to the next point to the next point. We've only done 3 in one day, but one point to the next point to the next point, and they were active in all 3 areas, all 3 areas being 20 miles apart from one another. Multiples would be knocking off or vocalizing at us. And so it just made it feel like it was, and granted, maybe all of those family units are related to one another, and it's a much broader family structure than I'm giving it credit, but it gave the impression that because there was multiple individuals responding to us in these different places on the same day, kind of made it feel like that this is probably different family units that we were dealing with.
Well, I can understand. Anything else you want to add to the interview?
Nothing I can think of off the top of my head, no.
Okay, well, I think it's really fascinating, especially how you reached the conclusion that, that perhaps they were a bit more human than what you'd given them credit for initially.
I definitely it's changed my whole outlook. It changed everything about the way I look at this, the way I research it. I think I don't know, it weirdly it felt like I guess it had to be a child to get through to me. Being a dad like I am, it just it was unnerving when it happened.
I would think there would be just a lot of feeling of empathy there.
Yes,
seeing
exactly.
the physical behavior. Yeah.
Like I told my wife, I'm like, it almost feels like I should be contacting someone to tell them there's a child out in the woods, to someone to go help this child. And they think I'm crazy though. But that's almost what it feels like I should be doing, like responsibility wise.